What's up? Welcome to a new Solo Leveling Arise video. I'll be talking about the custom radar banner, who to get first copies of, who's worth getting, and I'll be starting with the hunters first, and then move to the weapons. So first of all, I'll be starting with Jincho Wu, and you get him for logging into the game 7 days. He's absolutely for free, you don't need to pick him or summon for him, you'll just get him. Then going to Sio, she's obviously a must-have. She has great break damage. She is a very good DPS unit and an absolute MVP against Cerberus in the Anchor missions. And the next must-have unit is Emma. She also has break damage. She has a very wide AoE attack and she does damage over time. She also is a really good DPS. Moving on to Min. He is a support unit. He's healing, increasing the damage taken by enemies, and also buffing your characters with damage increase and critical hit rate increase. Next up would be Choi. I think he's between must-have and good to have, but I'll put him in the lower tier of must-have because he is a DPS. He's a great DPS. Um, but with Cha on the table, I don't think you really need him. But you can still use him as DPS, especially in stages where the enemy has defense against light type or is especially weak against fire type. But overall, he's not exactly a must-have. That's why I would like to put him in a tier in between there, but I'm not going to make a tier for him, so I'll just put him into must-have for now. And going into the good to have, I'll put Beck in here. He's a break character, but he's by far not as good as Sio or Emma. And I'll be moving on to Lim. Lim's a decent DPS and has break damage too. The next on the list is Dongsu, who I'll be putting into nice to have. He has his situations where he can be really useful, but overall he's just... His only gimmick is that he removes shield, basically. He has a stun on his support skill, but it really needs to be a very specific case for him to be really useful, in my opinion. But yeah, that's why he's a nice to have. Like, you could argue that he's a no need, but it, as I said, there are very specific situations where he might be nice to have. I wouldn't put him on the rate up though. Just hope to pull him from losing a 50-50 or something. Then Lee Bora also going to be into nice to have. Um, she has dark element damage buff, and she can also do passive damage with her phantom foxes, I think. I haven't used her because I don't have her, so I'm not exactly sure how that skill works. But I think she just summons the foxes and they stay for a certain amount of time. Correct me if I'm wrong. So basically for characters in the must-have and good-to-have tier, it would be worth it to rate them up if you have a free spot. Like obviously go for Sio, Emma, and Min first. But if you have like already 2 or 3 of them, maybe you want to feature Beck or Min too. Then for the weapons, the first must-have weapon is the Grimoire. The Grimoire has a freeze mechanic and deals additional damage after the freeze ends, depending on how much damage you dealt to the enemy during the freeze duration. That's a really useful skill and a great weapon to have. And the next weapon on must-have is the Plum Sword. The plum sword is more of a support weapon. It increases the crit hit damage by up to 36%, and it can also increase attack crit hit rate and usage speed, so you can use the skill faster. Then going to the good to have, I'll put the Huntsman. The Huntsman has break damage and overall is a good DPS weapon. Then I think I'll be putting the Moon Shadow in good to have too. It is also more of a support weapon and increases the damage the enemy takes while also increasing your own dark damage. So it can be really good against the Igris instance dungeon. Then the Vulcan is just going into no need. It's really no, it's not a good weapon. Would rather play an SR fire weapon if you need a fire weapon. Overall, not worth going for at all. The Demon King's longsword is, I would say, nice to have. It can do good damage, I think, but if you need a wind weapon, you should just go to the West Wind, the sniper gun. It it'll do you just fine. And the size is a really great weapon, but you get 2 copies of it for free from the challenges. So that's how I would see it for the first copies for each character and weapon. Now let's move on to dupes. For the dupes, I'll also be going with the characters first, and I'll just start with Sio, who will go into 2 dupes. I think that's her sweet spot. With her 2 dupes, she'll greatly increase her overall damage and break damage. For Min, um, you can argue for 1 dupe, 3 dupes, and 5 dupes. 1 dupe gives critical hit rate and critical hit damage increase for the whole team. So I would say 1 dupe is like the minimum you should go for him. Then on the 3rd dupe, he gets additional healing, which is not that big, but it's still something. And then on the 5th dupe, which is where I'll just leave him because I really like the 5th dupe. After he ults, he increases the damage of the next ult from the member with the highest total power by 50%, and that's like universal usable. You can use it on Zio, you can use it on Cha, you can use it on Choi, you can literally use it on anyone. Just make sure that the one you want to use it on is the one with highest total power and they just get the buff. For Lim, I would say 2 dupes is also pretty decent, increasing his overall DPS potential and his break effectiveness. For Lee Bora, I think if you want dupes for her, go for 1 dupe. It increases the amount of foxes to 3 and increases their damage. Overall, I don't think you should go for dupes for her. I don't think you should go for her at all, but if you go for her, 1 dupe is absolutely fine for her. Dongsu, don't go for dupes for him. It's not worth it. Then Emma, I think for Emma you can argue for 2 dupes or 5 dupes. Emma is an absolutely amazing unit, and her 2 dupes increases her break damage, while her 5 dupe, after breaking an enemy, it fills up your entire power and core gauge, so you can like instantly ult and use your core attack. You could use her ult before you break the enemies, and then you can use it right after you break the enemy. So that would be 2 ults back to back from her. and it also resets good cooldowns, while also increasing her damage. So her fifth dupe is absolutely crazy. For Choi, I think one dupe is more than enough. His third, fourth, and fifth are good, but I don't think it's really that worth it, especially with Cha around. Keep him at one dupe if you have him at all, or want dupes for him. One dupe is absolutely fine. His first dupe triples the damage of his Rain of Flame skills after he ulted, so which basically makes it a second ult for him. For Beck, as the other break characters as well, two dupes is absolutely fine if you go for dupes at all, because it increases his damage and break damage. For Jinchul Wu, I don't think dupes are worth for him at all. If you want a dupe for him, go for the first dupe. It increases his break effect of his mediation of power skill, but I don't think you will really use him that much. So this is like an overall list that I would go for over time. However, I think if you're like free to play, you will most likely not get to 5 dupes. If any, you get to 2 dupes. So if you have to choose who to dupe out, I will probably like put it like this. Maybe even put Choi down. Like you definitely want the dupes for Zio, and you want dupes for Min, in my opinion, and Emma. Those are your top units that you also want to dupe. Feel free to share your opinions in the comments. Okay, for weapon dupes, I would say each weapon is kind of worth going for one dupe at least, with the exception of this thing. The Vulcan's Rage is not worth getting at all. Don't bother about it. If you pull it, well, I'm sorry. It's really not that useful of a weapon. For weapons that you want dupes for are the Scythe. Scythe. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. The Plum Sword and the Grimoire, basically. So for those, the 3 dupe passive of the Thighs is really good, in my opinion. It heals you by 0.4% with each hit if you're under 60%, which can be really useful in a fight. For the Plum Sword, I'm not exactly sure if that passive skill only activates when you are on this exact weapon, or if it also activates if you're on your second weapon. It says if the user uses dash, it applies amplifying draw, which lasts for 5 seconds and increases your critical hit damage by another 32%. So it's an amazing passive. It's just a question, is it only working while you're on the Plum Sword, or is it also working while you're on, like, let's say the Scythe, right? So for the book, the Grimoire, the 3-star passive doesn't really do that much. It's good, but it's way better combined with the 5 dupe passive. The 3 dupe passive increases the additional damage you do after the freeze period ends. And the 5 dupe passive increases the damage dealt to frozen targets. So those two combined are gonna do a lot more damage to the enemy, while only the 3-star passive is, I don't think it's worth going for if you're only going for the 3-star passive. And the other weapons, I don't think for those 3 weapons you should really go for. Like for those 2, if you lose your 50-50 to them, take it. but overall, I don't think you should put them in the rate up list. For the Huntsman, it's a really useful weapon, and you'll probably use it every now and then, so getting the 2000 precision on it is definitely a good thing. There's also the option to save your tickets because they might be adding the rate up characters into this custom rate up banner like they did with Troy. And we don't really know if they do or not. My opinion is yes, they will, but others say they might not. So we will see. We'll see later on. I think this right here is the minimum you should go for before you consider saving. But of course, it's your choice. It's just how I see it. And yeah, remember the Scythe is a free weapon that you get from the challenges with one dupe. So there's no reason to summon for it. But just because I don't have it in here right now, it doesn't mean it's a bad weapon. It's a great weapon. So that's it for the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, and I hope I see you in the next one.